They had to have been peering over the 6-foot wood fence in order to see it, and that means they were snooping, and then they went and had to turn me in. Welcome to Watching the Horizon. I'm Jake. Been away for a little while. Hope you didn't miss me too bad. I'm sure all four of you. Oh, not coffee. So, is the government really against preppers? It seems to me that if you look back in history, let's go back to World War II. Prepper really wasn't in the vernacular. That wasn't a term that was typical for the time. But a lot of the practices that the government actually encouraged of the citizens, one would consider by today's standards to be prepping activities. Things like growing your own food, having a garden, a victory garden, conserving of natural resources. There was big pushes for things like copper and aluminum and other precious metals, for the war effort. There's been a lot of discussion since then that while a lot of those efforts, pushed by the government to the American people, it was there, but it wasn't actually necessary. Really, what it was the government's attempt to involve the people, more of a cheerleading practice. But when it comes to things like, growing your own food and learning how to can, a lot of basic country living type stuff, I don't think they were wrong. Now, since then, obviously, some time has passed. Politics have changed. We haven't really had a conflict on that scale that has affected us here, like it did back then. Now, for those of you who see the writing on the wall, have that sense that something is in the air, something is amiss, and that you have made the decision either recently or maybe you've always had it, maybe you were born into it, the feeling that you need to take care of you and yours, and that reliance on anyone else, you can't really count on that. When you look at videos, when you look at the news, you're going to see headlines like, man arrested for growing vegetables in his front yard. You're going to see, things like somebody gets fined $1,000 a day because he tried to disconnect his home from the electrical grid. Here's the thing. Let's make a distinction here, first and foremost. It's important to at least mention, as far as the federal government is concerned, there were no rules broken here. The issues really were more of a local nature, like city ordinances. The one where the guy tried to disconnect his home from the power grid, they had a city ordinance that said that you're not allowed to do that. That's where the fines were coming from. That's where the trouble began, and it ended up in court. Same with the person who was trying to grow vegetables in his front yard, and they were told to uproot the garden, mow it down. It had to be grass. Again, it's more to do with, the local stuff. The federal government, which they're kind of painted as the bad guy in most of these situations, I really don't see Congress passing any sort of legislation or enacting any kind of law that's really going to be a hindrance to us preppers. If anything, what they've got on the books is very pro self-reliance. As long as you don't get in the way of, the tax base, as long as you don't cause a disruption, it's really going to be the local, state, city PD. These are going to be the governments that you're going to have to worry about. They're also the most restrictive by far. When I bought my first house, I remember thinking, yay, home ownership. It's finally happened. I can be free. Only to realize that, I had rented for a long time, previous to that, and I was very familiar with the rules of, renting, what you could and could not do. When I owned property, and this was in the big city, I was still handcuffed. There was lots of things I couldn't do. I tried to build a shed, and I was having to spend like over $1,000 before I even got the shovel out, just so that I could get permission. I mean, it was pretty ridiculous. At the time, I was in Colorado, and I wanted to do some water conservation in Colorado. During that time, they had very, very strict water laws. Now, since then, they've eased up a little bit in regards to rain collection. You are allowed, I think, a rain barrel. There's a certain number of gallons. Let me know. I wanted some water just in case. You know, there was lots of stuff in the news at the time. I wanted an IBC tote full of water. And I filled it up. I went and bought one. I found one that was, food safe. I got it. I put it in my backyard. Again, this is, a suburban type home within the city limits, and, washed it out, cleaned it out, and because I couldn't use rainwater, I had to use the hose. So I used the hose and I filled it up. I got a big tarp and I put it over the top of that thing. I winterized it, put a big tarp over it, and man, wouldn't you know it, within a couple of weeks, I got a knock on my door, and it was, somebody from the city, and they're like, hey, we have some concerns. Now, this was in my backyard. This was flush up against the house. The only way anybody would have seen it is if it were one of my neighbors, and they had to have been peering over the 6-foot wood fence in order to see it, and that means they were snooping, and then they went and had to turn me in. And this was just based on suspicion. So I'm getting talked to because someone thought that I was doing something because I had the tarp. They were calling the city because they were worried that I was collecting rainwater when that was a big no-no. So obviously I told the guy to go pound sand. I mean, here's the deal. They can't fine you. They can't, give you a ticket. They have to prove that that's what they did. I mean, the burden's on them. And I was ready to fight it. This was around the same time that I was trying to look to put a shed in. And really that whole series of events is pretty much what kind of kicked off my my red pill moment when I realized that, I needed to get out of the city. I mean, it had always made sense to do that, but now it was just, that was personal. As far as the federal government being against preppers, I don't think that's the case. Will that change in the future during an SHTF situation? Absolutely 100%. Preppers will definitely be the enemy in that scenario. But again, it will be unlikely, in my opinion, that it will be a federal threat. I'm not worried about that. I'm more concerned with the local grabs for power, which again just goes back to something I've preached in the past, which is community. If you're a lone wolf prepper during this period of time, that's fine. Prepping by yourself in secret solo, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But should the balloon go up, should there be an event, you're going to want to be part of a community. It's a whole lot easier to be part of a community now and sort of grow up and build together, have the event, and then maintain that cohesion of the group rather than attempt to join a group after the fact. If you're planning on going lone wolf after an SHTF situation, I think 100% you're going to be the target of whatever local or whatever government is trying to impose its will at that time. But if you're part of a community, there's power in numbers. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on it. I appreciate you watching, and go ahead and tell me what you think down in the comments, and explain to me why you think I'm wrong. Of course, I don't really have to say that. You're very adept at doing that anyway. So you have a good one. I'll talk to you next time. Be sure to keep your eyes open.